Welcome to the Indiana Children Nature Network. ICAN Play 30 summer and just chat discussion and book discussion of Beyond Ecophobia, which is really a glorified essay, but has important information for us to consider about our children and getting outside. Just want to share just a little bit about ICAN. As part of the Environmental Educators Association of Indiana, trying to have state-specific resources. And some things that we do is this ICAN Play 30 initiative, as well as our Nature Play Days. We have dates for next year, June 1st through 9th, 2024, and just got done with 10 great days of having nature play across the state, which is fantastic and wonderful. The mission really is just to foster connections and help our communities, children, families, educators receive that physical, emotional, intellectual benefits of spending time outdoors as they build that lifelong love of nature. We do that by raising awareness, promoting that unstructured play and time outdoors, and engaging diverse network of people and facilitating collaborations. We'd love to hear from you and what you're doing and how we can work together to make that happen. For example, just recently started communicating more with librarians and such on this. Part of this is I Can Play 30 seasonal ideas just to get outside for at least 30 minutes every day. I find that once we're outside for 30, we often play longer, and then seasonal ideas along with it. Part of that is one project that happened in the northern part of the state, 52 things to do outside in summer. And with that, there's a whole website with it. And these are some of the ideas that they have for summer. And most of these, if you were to click on them, they'd have additional links and resources to help with that. Take an outdoor picnic. We've been having very moderate weather for the summer right now. So just taking our food and eating it outside, looking for an animal in water. We went macroinvertebrate dipping this last week at one of the nature play days, and we're able to find crawfish and let's see what else, caddisfly and different animals and insects and all of those within the water. But then we also found other evidence. You could see sometimes the line of the muskrat swimming through the duckweed. We've been seeing lots of turtles and fish and some of those things as well. I haven't seen them yet in the northern part of the states, but fireflies catching and releasing them. I know that was a summer favorite. We have to stay up late is what I've noticed, like 9 or 10 usually to get them. Watching a pollinator at work, those flowers as they open up, and the bees and other pollinators working busily and hard at that. Enjoying a bike ride. We're lucky to have a lot of different paths around us that we can go on as well. And even just in our own neighborhood, it's nice to be out on a bike, rolling down a hill, blowing dandelion seeds, visiting a wetland, skipping a stone, depending on where you are. The pond at our space, we say, don't skip the stones here unless you bring them from some place else, because we need the rocks there to protect the shoreline. Also making a mud pie. It's actually International Mud Day coming up soon. And so June 29th, a great day to celebrate mud. And there's so many different ways. And we actually had a virtual mud lab as part of our nature play days. And that's recorded and on YouTube so that you can see that if you'd like to for more additional resources and ideas. And then we were on this earlier and I didn't start recording quite right away, but we just talked about your summer outdoor plans, and this was a mulberry stained hand, and I found I have a 10-year-old and 14-year-old that's home right now. Some of the older ones are gone off on summer adventures, but they had mulberry juice all over their face. I'm like, what's that stuff on your face? And it was after they had their mulberry juice stained hands, they rubbed it all over their face, even the 14-year-old, which I thought was beautiful. But that's become kind of a nightly ritual right now, is to walk down to the mulberry trees. We check with our neighbors first and eat as many mulberries as we can and such, and maybe they'll pick some and we'll make some jam or something with it too. But we talked about that progression of berries in the summertime, and especially like when we live near a bigger city or something like that. We had a participant online from the Indianapolis area. She talked about how they went strawberry picking at one farm, and it goes all the way through. Then there's the blueberries and the raspberries, and we like black raspberries. We can find them in the wild as well. But then also the black raspberry, and not black raspberries, blackberries. Those are kind of the later ones. We also talked about service berries as well. I know in the town of Goshen, where I live, they purposely plant service berries, which are a native tree. And the berries, while they're not commercially sold typically, they are edible, and they provide food for birds and animals and such as well, and can be tasty for us as well. A little different than some of the other ones, but I'd say that comes between mulberries and black raspberries where I live. So yeah, enjoy all those berries and find some of those real life farm experiences that children can, and garden experiences, can participate and know where their food comes from. That's one thing that I've noticed is, picking in enough berries for like a special dessert or something like that. We start to recognize how much effort it takes to get those frozen berries that we have in our freezer as well. We get connected to those gifts of summer a little bit more. And our discussion this evening was around Beyond Ecophobia, Reclaiming the Heart in Nature Education by David Sobel. We did talk about how this was a little bit older book. It's almost 30 years old, written in 1996. So that's been quite a while. Do these same principles still apply today? If you haven't read it, in the event for the event description, I guess you could say, on Facebook, shared several different articles and things that you could read instead of the book. The book really is a long essay. It's very thin. And David Sobel is very interesting. I just saw him at a conference about a week and a half ago, and his words still ring true today. And he really talks about, I would say these are some of these main points that he talks about, that children need to have that opportunity to bond with the natural world, to love it and feel comfortable in it before we ask them to heal its wounds.
Growing a garden and getting to understand those parts of nature before you ask kids. And recycling is something that you can ask kids to do. You can ask little things like that. So if I see somebody go and throw it in the trash can, I'm like, we can, recycle that. Just rinse it out and recycle it. So I think stuff like that is a little more, it's literally tangible versus save the earth is, that's a really broad concept.
And I think that's what he talks about. And I have noticed this trend in early childhood environmental education of sustainability within early childhood nature-based things. And, there are practices that we can do, like the beeswax wraps or reusable materials or compostable plates and some of those kinds of things. So there are things that we can do, just choosing to walk instead of driving our car. Those are just small things that we can do just to somewhat even just enjoy our lives. It doesn't necessarily save the earth, but it's just small, simple things that we can do to have a sustainable lifestyle and program, and thinking about waste in the programs that we may have and such as well. So,
one of the things that he talked a lot about is helping children enjoy nature through, exploring animals and nature itself. And one of the things that we did in our class this year is the children were really into animals, and so we talked about like what happens when an animal gets hurt or sick. They need to be taken care of. And so I contacted Providence Wildlife, and they brought some of their injured animals to share. And it between the time we talked about what happens to hurt animals and before Providence brought the animals, is the children brought in their loose change that they'd earned from doing little tours around their house, and they brought that in and put it in a jar, and were able to donate so that the animals could get food and things that they needed. And they loved that. They loved being able to see the animals that they impacted.
yep. Local, place-based, those animals in space.
Yes. Makes a whole lot more sense than, like you said, saving polar bears that they may never ever see. So
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that comes out lots of times in winter. Oh, winter, we got to do polar bears. I'm like, well, what's happening with the animals just locally and such? And I have a wildlife rehabilitator person that I called, and he brings in such interesting animals and is so willing to do it. And this is kind of similar sentiment. You know, if we want children to flourish, to become truly empowered, let us allow them to love the earth before we ask them to save it. And it takes time to be in nature, I think, to do that. That's why the like ICAN Play 30, the 1,000 hours outdoors, any of those kinds of things, we're making sure that we're spending time with children outside to do it. I think that David, and I actually saw him at a conference a week and a half ago or so, that one thing that he does in some of the stories here is just how he talks about following the children, spending time outside in them and doing kind of mundane things, but then also following their interests and explorations, like the following of the stream and some of those things. I liked this too, that animal ally thing. Cultivating relationships with animals, both real and imagined, is one of the best ways to foster empathy in early childhood. And like you shared earlier, Teresa, that really makes an impact with being able to connect with animals nearby.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this one or the other?
Well, I know being outside in our outdoor classroom and seeing the birds, our I almost every year have children who are really interested in the birds, and I love the idea of, having them be and pretend to be the birds, from the book, talking about that, and how that is more important than and helping them to understand what a bird is, what is great, what kind of gifts do the birds bring, the idea of flight, and things like that. So I love that section of well, of course I read the article, I didn't get to read the book, but
The book is
I love,
probably similar to the article. It's really like a long essay. It's not, I
yeah,
mean, it's like this thin, and it's really
yeah,
like
it's
a
really,
long
yeah,
essay.
but I love that because children children love animals, and if they can feel like they can be the animals, I mean, we have butterfly wings and various kinds of insect wings and stuff like that, but having the wings of birds and pretending to be the birds and things like that, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And our session on living loose parts at the Indiana AUIC conference, we talked a lot about that. And that'll be part of our book that comes out next year as well, of becoming the animal and such, and some of those kinds of things. And I've got some slides to kind of share a little bit of that as well in a little bit. And so then this other one, and this was more for like the teenagers. And well, he had some time frames like 4 to 7, 8 to 11, 12 and up kind of thing. I see those lines a little bit blurred as far as some of the things that I have noticed with children as I've worked with them. Like I noticed that younger children still enjoy doing fort building, but when they get to that middle childhood that you talks about, they take it up a notch, and I've seen some pretty cool things that kids have done. But this one's a little bit older. Exploration of the natural world begins in early childhood, flourishes in middle childhood, and continues in adolescence as a pleasure and a source of strength for social action. So just kind of looking at that progression. So exploration, that time where they get to start getting more independence, and then nature becomes pleasurable and then actionable as well. So these were just some generic questions about the book. Anything surprise you? Did you have favorite quotes or concepts? And how does it apply to your role? Is there something you want to put into action? And we can come back to these too if you don't have anything at this very moment. But I thought I'd get us started with some of our own thoughts too. And how about we come back to this, because some of the other slides I have just kind of outline some of the things that were in the article book. And that may give us some like, oh, but these are things you can kind of continue to think about as we kind of go through this. So he really talks about those stages of development, the finding animal allies. I wondered about plants in all of this as well, because they are a wonderful living loose part as well. But the examples that he shared were like the becoming the birds, like you mentioned, the storytelling with the tiger burning bright, the inner Amazon, and then the exploration, the watershed wisdom, the stream grooming that they did, and following the streams. So you kind of had animals, the water, understanding the water cycle with it, and then the social action as children get older, and saving the spaces that are dear to them from their childhood. And Teresa, you had mentioned about all the alumni that came back to some of your nature play days in another conversation. And that's kind of like that, the forts example, I think that he shares in this. You know, this is a space that's near and dear to them, that they come back. I know that we had a tower at one of our local parks was burned down, and it's been like 20 years probably, but it was a tower that I had remembered it as a child, and you're like, oh, the tower's burned down, and all of the community support that came around to rebuild that, just because it was such a nostalgic, memorable part of people's childhood, to climb up to the top and then be able to see the vista from high up above. So I kind of see that a little bit with it.
Yeah, I loved how the alumni, their favorite things they did while they were at our school was what they did when they visited, like rolling down the hill, taking the wagon, getting in the wagon, rolling down the hill, digging in the sandbox, playing in the mud kitchen. And it was really funny. It was the children who, that is what they, and I remember those children spending hours in those areas. And I was like, it's so funny that now they're coming back, and they're third and fifth graders, and they're going back to the same exact thing that was near and dear to them back then. So yeah,
That is so
definitely.
cool.
Yeah.
This first stage that he talks about, and I wonder if he were to write about even younger children, and I see this happening at least at age 3, if not a little bit earlier, 2.5 or so. But if you were to write about younger children, what would that be? I see really a lot of cause and effect and experimentation with younger children, textures, the transporting, the schema that we talk about in play and loose parts frequently, but the filling and dumping, all of those kinds of things. But just being exploring what is there, I guess. And I guess he talks this age area around exploration as well, but really kind of goes in on that empathy and finding the animal allies. He talks just briefly about, stories, songs, moving like animals, celebrating the seasons, fostering that sense of wonder that Rachel Carson talks about. And he talks, beginning again once in empathy. These were worms on the ground when we were looking at worms one day, and the children moving their bodies. And it's so interesting, even when they just have like free time to explore a concept in any way they want to, I still see children like creeping along the ground as worms and such. So,
My class always spends a lot of time being cats.
Oh,
Something
yeah.
about 5-year-olds and being cats. So yes.
I taught first grade for a couple of years, and I had some cats in there sometimes too. So, but it's, entering into that perspective of that animal and such. And, this is a quote from the book, cultivating those relationships, both real and imagined, is one of the best ways to foster empathy during early childhood. They want to run like deer, to slither along the ground like snakes, to be as clever as a fox and quick like a bunny. There's no need for endangered species here. There are more than enough common everyday species to fill the lives of children. And the environmentally correct notion of not anthropomorphizing animals can be thrown out the window. And so that's like when we shouldn't put human characteristics on animals, kind of thing, or becoming animals. That's what he's talking about there. It's fine for children to take on that perspective. It really develops the senses and skills and empathy that they're developing. And like what he's mentioning here, talks about those super skills that they have. What are those capabilities that make them unique that we can learn from. So. And then just that place-based education, I think he really talks about it. This is, he's talking about, like you were talking about maps earlier, Teresa, children's home fill the center of the maps, and much of the play is within sight or earshot of the home. So they describe the worms, the chipmunks, the pigeons that live in their yards or on their blocks. They feel protective of the animals that are there. So we should attempt to engage the children more deeply, knowing the flora, fauna, and the character of their own local places. The woods behind the school and the neighborhood streets and stores are the places to start. And even even in more urban areas and such, I noticed like birds' nests in the marquee, the signs of grocery stores and such. There's life all around us if we're looking for it, but it may be a little ditch somewhere instead of a larger park or something of the sort. Any thoughts on this one about bringing it back to where we are right now?
I definitely think that it gives children the opportunity to really hone in on their observation skills. Acting like the animals helps them learn to really observe. I mean, in order to be able to act like an animal, you need to observe that animal. And so it gives them that opportunity to maybe you do it with them once, and then they go outside and they actually see that animal, and they're able to really watch. The next time they may expand their way of acting out that bird or that worm or whatever it is that they're learning about. So
Yeah. I did just have a couple of examples from working with early childhood. These were mostly with 4-year-olds and maybe some 5-year-olds too, but just the exploration of worms and real live ones they can bring, can touch, and immediately some children start building habitats for the worms. Others like do not want to touch it, so having a craft stick so that they can use it as well. There is a book in here with some of these pictures and such. This is a book to read with a worm, and it helps you kind of a guided practice of investigating and learning more about the worm as part of that. And just interesting to see how they explore and want to find them, like to watch them move and all of those things. And yeah.
what are
And
the names of those books, the books there? Sorry.
See, you know what? I have just done a podcast episode about it that has them all listed on it.
Okay.
So my latest podcast episode is called Worms, Glorious Worms, and it should have them all listed.
I will listen.
That's Loose Parts Nature Play. So the podcast and shares, some of what we do with that. And then beavers as well. So I have like these little Loose Parts Nature Play kits, I call them, of just some simple props and things that we can use. So we were able to feel the fur, to see wood that was cut, chewed down. And this book, I'm Done, is just a fun representation. There is a brand new book that's pretty good about showing a more naturally historical, correct way of beavers. This I'm Done is more of a playful way that the beaver interacts with other animals, but still capitalizes on that hard work that beavers do, and the little beaver tails, if we want to put those on and such, and some pictures and such. But then I always bring in, and or depending on where I am, sometimes nature has a lot built in that we can build with. At this school in particular, they don't have a whole lot. So I'll bring different building sets and building blocks and such so that the children can build like the beavers as well. But these are things that we see in our area. I was just taking a hike this week and I saw this big old beaver lodge, so I set the context, or the children sometimes will come to me and say, we just saw some beavers. Can you tell us about that? And then I can also share, where we find those locally with the families and such as well. For me, squirrels, I would say, is one of my favorite ones because they are so easy to spot and prolific in most places. And I love this book, Squirrels Leap, Squirrels Sleep by April Policer. She's got all kinds of books for young children that are kind of rhyming, but with just a short amount of information, words each page. She shares a lot of information about the animals where you can become the animal ally with it as a read along kind of thing. And we have little squirrel tails. We have buckets they can go caching. They may be climbing the trees, etc. And other things I share other ways that they explore that. And I've got a podcast episode just about squirrels too, Squirrel Appreciation Day, and some of the ways to leap and zigzag and all of the different things that squirrels do as part of that. And then woodpeckers. We see a lot of different woodpeckers in their heads and poking at things with their beaks is really interesting. So it's really neat to see just simple props. And we do have one set of woodpecker wings, but just fabric in the clothespins, you can see how they've kind of tied those on, flipped them on to be some of their wings as part of becoming woodpeckers. But then they also use the clips to be little beaks to feed the babies and such. And then we often will use like golf tees into cardboard boxes because it's a safe thing, and peck with those. And so that same author, April Policer, she's got a book called Woodpecker Wham that goes really well with this. And then I try to bring in pictures of the ones that we have here. And I did see one child like take two of the tees and put them together like his own little beak, that he was pecking like that as well. But just neat to see what they come up with after we set the stage. So yeah, those were just a few ideas and things that I know I've done with the animal ally aspect. Tinkergarten has a lot of good resources with that as well. And I've gotten ideas from them and Growing Up Wild and a variety of different resources and just kind of watching the books. And some of the books just have good dialogue to help spark the imagination of where children could take it from there. Like there's the book, The Snail Spell. It really takes you down into being a snail in a garden. So any other thoughts on animal allies in that early childhood aspect of it? Okay. Feel free to jump in if you have something to share. And then just that exploration time, the teaching the landscape. And I found this picture. I love that it's actually, this was a school age group that I facilitated during the summer. I'd brought in all kinds of loose parts, but in the mirror, you can see the reflection of this like kingdom that they created with places to sit. There's like chairs without the legs on them. They provided their shade. It was like they created their own space with it. And he talks about during this time period, they're making forts. They're creating the small imaginary worlds. So I see that earlier a lot too. The hunting and gathering of resources, searching for treasures, following streams and pathways, exploring the landscape, taking care of the animals, not just becoming them and learning about them, but taking care of them as well. Gardening, shaping the earth in different ways, and exploring the nearby world and knowing your place where you are right there. Any thoughts on this age or stage here?
I was going to say, again, I think going back to some of your observation, Carla, I do think like the taking care of animals can happen earlier depending on the children as well. Like, like you were talking about them making the little homes for the worms and things like that. That's their way of figuring out, they need a place,
Yeah.
to be safe, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
One
And the same
thing,
with gardening.
yeah, one thing that I guess I see a difference between that younger age and this age is before it's more play at taking care. And at this age, they can do it more independently. They may need a few reminders here or there, but it's more they can take on that responsibility a little bit more themselves. Yeah. Like, and even thinking of my nephews that have the chickens and such, when they were in that younger age, they may help take care of things, or they may play along, care alongside, but when they're in this age range, they can go feed the chickens on their own kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Gather the eggs on their own and such. So that would be, and it's that natural progression of gaining more independence, really, which
Right.
they need.
Yeah, and I think all of these stages that he's talking about, there's those slow progressions for, you know, even in the younger ages, you see tidbits of things that later become more expansive, and that's what development is all about, you know.
Yeah.
So
And that was one of your comments just about the book in general. It's about slowing down our busy, frantic lives and allowing time in nature so that we can develop these things. And I love just seeing forts in general in places where they've been left up, and we can add just a little bit to it. It means not only has a child played in that space, but adults have allowed them to play, and other adults have allowed it to stay up instead of taking it down. So
yeah.
that just makes my heart happy. I know that we have a few places in our county where we can go, where there are some partially made forts that we can go add to and play around and pretend they're beaver forts and beaver lodges and all of those kinds of things as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a I was real excited to see it. One of the parks in Hamilton County, Potters Bridge Park, there is in one little area near the playground, a child, or I'm assuming children, built this like teepee kind of fort with sticks and stuff,
Uh-huh.
and it's been left up there. And I was really surprised because, you know, sometimes those parks department, you know, try to keep things neat and tidy. Sometimes clean that up, but they left it, and I love it because you know, like our younger children don't always know what to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
but those older children, like you said, the 8 to 11 year olds, they definitely
And
know what to do with it.
I see this age taking more charge, especially towards the older range. And I do find that into that early adolescence that they are still like I remember a set of a bunch of young teen males, like probably 12-year-olds. They came over, they divided up into groups, and they asked for some materials here and there, but for the most part, they were just using what they found in nature. And they both kind of, both groups made their own little home base. One group like made this little bridge over the stream and like, hey, can we get this thing that I built, this bench, and bring it out here? Got a tarp to cover the space and all of these kinds of things. And just kind of neat to see what they do. But it wasn't, I didn't have to facilitate it at all. I mean, I was there for safety and some of those kinds of things, but you know, even didn't need to have as much supervision because they were a little bit older and they could have more autonomy with it. And they were doing a lot of problem solving, collaborating with that as well. So, and even like getting out the metal detectors around this age, the searching for treasures, I see a lot of interest in that as well. So one thing that he shared about this in this section was about the water cycle. He said the water cycle isn't something to be taught in 2 weeks, you know, like the worksheet that we do with the little arrows and such. It's best done over the 6 or 8 years of elementary and middle school. The water courses of the landscape are the circulatory system of the living earth. We can only learn about them by following them literally and metaphorically. Kind of goes back to that map making, but he also talks just about following the streams. And so there's a pond and a stream by my house. I'm like, where does water that comes into this pond come from? You know, and where does the stream go to? And we know that it goes into another lake, but then after that, where does it go and such? And how does it all get into where we live? In particular, we empty into Lake Michigan. So what are the waterways to get there and the tributaries that feed into the St. Joseph River that eventually goes into Lake Michigan? So those kinds of things. He said the concepts and content of the water cycle are teachable and accessible, but only with a raft of tangible, concrete experiences to carry us through the process. And perhaps even a real raft. Like, could you imagine going through it? He does talk about one book with this called Paddle to the Sea. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this. It did win or was an honorable mention or so of the Caldecott Award. It is kind of like picture book, but heavy on content and map making within that. And a child maybe up in Minnesota drops off his little carving of a person inside of a boat down the ice into the water, and it eventually travels all through the Great Lakes and then out to the ocean, and it has a little message on it. And so through the book you see the adventures of Paddle to the Sea, his little boat that goes through it, and like the poo sticks and some of those things, which is kind of neat. But it's a little bit old, but it is still kind of cool.
I thought it was interesting, and I never thought about it until this article where he was talking about how children don't know to draw the water going down, they draw it going up. And I was like, never really made that observation. That was very interesting.
Yeah, and there are places that have like those watershed boxes for environmental education where you can see the water come out, and even like Kaplan Early Learning, but other places have those augmented reality sandbox things with a projector on over sand, and you can play around with the landforms and make it rain, and see where the water flows with it afterwards and such. So that's another kind of cool thing to it's not quite the same as following the stream itself, but you get a concept of it. And I just love this. And I think that it's part of early or childhood too, not just this middle group. Wet sneakers and muddy clothes are prerequisites for understanding the water cycle. Yeah. We see
That's a great quote. I think I'm going to have to pull that one out.
yeah. I just think of like playing in the rain and some of those things. I have one child, a teenager, but since he's been young, he's wanted to wait until it's raining to go play, not just, oh, you might want to go play. It's 15 minutes, it's going to rain. It's like, can't we just wait for the rain? He goes out for running when it's raining now too, just because he enjoys the water as part of it and such. And he does put this caution. This is actually in the next section of the book or article, but I thought that it was a good transition between these ages and stages. It says no tragedies before 4th grade. He talks about, like the rainforest destruction, oil spills, genocide, and war. It is really hard to shield children from all of the things that are going on in the world right now. So I don't think that it's that they can't ever know about it, but like it doesn't become their responsibility. I remember I was teaching 4th grade at the time, and this girl had seen a section on the news, and she talked about how these people were fighting over an onion. And she's like, an onion? She wanted to come and organize a bake sale at school and such to raise money to send so that these people had food, that empathy that had been developing over time. But before that, they're not really necessarily ready to have all of it. I mean, deal with all the complexity that comes with it. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to be aware of it sometimes. But this is what he shares. When do children have the emotional and cognitive readiness for dealing with overwhelmingly sad and conceptually complex issues? It's kind of a big thing. So for him, he has, kind of put a hard line, no tragedies before 4th grade. And like we mentioned earlier, there is a little bit of creep into, and we see it, let's save the polar bears, the ice caps are melting. And, any thoughts on this? Do you agree with it, or have a caveat? And this was written 30 years ago almost. So what does that mean in today's world? Can we have this luxury of allowing children to have childhood a little bit more untarnished?
I will have to say that it's hard for adults to get around, like to cognitively deal with some of these things. And I think especially since COVID, I think it's even stronger, at least from my observation, like the feeling of being overwhelmingly sad and having a harder time dealing with these complex issues is hard enough for adults, let alone adding that to children who are still, learning about the world.
Yeah, it can be a heavy burden. And our next webinar is about the healing power of nature. So it's interesting that our issues that we've created as humans in nature, that we can get sad within that and a little overwhelmed, but also nature is that healing power for us as well. So just kind of interesting. Need to protect that time and space and places where we can connect to nature for it, I think, as well. So, and I think this kind of goes into this next age group, the social action, saving the neighborhood, ages 12 plus. And I love that this became artwork of all the recycled things with all these beautiful colors with it. But the maintaining school recycling programs, you know, helping pass town ordinances. And we have in our town, we're a little different up here, but in this particular town of Goshen, but we have teens on the appointed to different boards within the city council as far as environmental literacy and some of those kinds of things. They may be testifying at hearings. And when we think about it, well, those of us who may be a little bit older, you know, yes, there are some issues with the world in nature, but it's not going to, is it really going to affect us? But it is going to be affecting children and children's children and some of those people. And we've seen more youth activists, and they're putting their voices out there so that that we can have conversations about the issues and problems right now. So the planning and going on school expeditions, widening their circle. They're not just in the neighborhood anymore, but even like the 14-year-old of mine, he asked, we were downtown one time and he's like, I wonder if I could ride my bike here. And we do have a busy road that I worry about, but that's that independence that they're seeking. They want to be downtown and on their own and being able to explore a little bit more within parameters perhaps. But my dad grew up in this area and he talks about how he rode his bike all over the place, probably starting around age 10. It wasn't as busy then, but you know, that was something that people did more. And teenagers' lives have kind of gotten smaller and smaller. And yes, we have this online world that many of them interact with, but they need those real life experiences too, that connection to society, and even those rites of passage to let them know, you know, that they're entering a new phase of life, kind of like that. We do have several webinars from Indiana Children in Nature about connecting tweens and teens with nature. If interested, it's just up on the ICAN website, probably under events and such. So you can see those ones, or even a whole nother page within the website for that. But they're trying to take those next steps often. And one of my sons went to a conservation leadership camp last week, and he was able to spend, you know, the whole week camping and paddling and hosting, you know, being part of the people hosting a nature play day. So giving back in that way, allowing other children to experience and play. And it was so neat to see teens playing with the natural loose parts and such with that as well. But they're our future leaders in what's going to happen with that. So any thoughts on the social action and saving the neighbor, taking those next steps into action with some of these? Okay. I did find that it was interesting that they had a book list in the back of the book, and also noted that these books were 30 years old. They are some classics. Many, I try to share some that I knew about a little bit more personally, that are good ones that I've enjoyed and such. With this, like the Salamander Room, Stella Luna, Winnie the Pooh, that focus on that empathy. And some of the books that I mentioned earlier with some of the animal things, and I can share as well. I've pulled together some of my podcast episodes about animals and animal play for some other training that I was doing. So I can share that out as well. Then that exploration, that pedal to the sea, the flotsam, a couple of boys have the best week ever, that exploration time that they have. And then that social action, My Side of the Mountain, Julie of the Wolves, like being immersed in that space. And I remember even as a child reading those books, you know, and we're reading them with my children. Hoot is a good one, that's a little bit newer, and The Evolution of Calpurnia Tate. These are all good books. And I wonder, what would today's book list of these stages look like? So that was kind of one of my kind of questions with this, you know, what books might be on this list today. How would we update this for current books? And maybe that's a project that as ICAN, we may want to investigate and look at and see what we can do. Taryn Hassler, in your area, do you know her, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, she always
Yeah.
has good book suggestions. And so one book that we've been reading, and I would say it's probably on the social action side of things. It's marketed for like ages 8 to 12, but I would say that it starts into the social action aspect of it, is the decomposition of Jack. uh, his mom is a roadkill expert. A decomposing expert. She's a scientist. She has grant money. She goes around and picks up roadkill, measures it, logs it, records it, probably takes pictures of it, and then has it decomposing in her backyard landscape, I guess you could say. And, his parents, I mean, the kids at school know him as the roadkill kid because he goes and helps her with it and such. And I just found this whole process of decomposition, just with other things that I'm doing, just fascinating. But then at the same time, he thinks that there's a cougar there, and but it's extirpated from the state. There are no breeding pairs that they know of in the state, but it seems they're seeing evidence of it. And so it kind of becomes this mystery. And he's doing this project at school, and he kind of advocated to be able to do it on a cougar, even though his teacher kind of gave him some pushback. And I haven't seen how it all ends up, but it does have a social emotional tie-in. As he's seeing these other things decompose, he's feeling the stress from his parents' divorce and that decomposition himself in his life. But as we know from decomposition, it also builds new growth. It returns to the soil. And so I'm excited to see those next steps that happen as we learn more about the cougar and he does and such as well. So that's one, though it kind of goes with the exploration, but a little bit more with the social action. And I've been listening to it with my sons and have really enjoyed it. But any other thoughts on the books or anything?
I think it's Carl and the Meaning of Life. Have you read that?
Is that a worm one?
It's about a worm.
Yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
on my book list. I had done it for, pulled together one from, what is it called? For the International Journal of Early Childhood Environmental Education, since I'm the book and resource editor. And I'd actually done it for the spring, but they didn't publish one that time. It's like, you know what, I'll go ahead and do a podcast episode about it too. And yeah. So Carl and the Meaning of Life. And there were a couple I found with the worm ones, and you'll hear about it in that podcast episode, that were a little bit more on like the graphic novel, kind of more jokes around worms and such as well, that really ties into that need for a little bit older children to have a little bit more edgier book about worms instead of something that's, a little bit more cute, I guess, or informational, I guess. Takes that gross look at it to some degree. So, but I'm intrigued about this project, and I may reach out to Taryn and anyone else who's interested to see about pulling together an updated list of this. So we can discuss any of these. We kind of discussed some of them, but what are your next steps after reading Beyond Ecophobia for children in the nature movement, whatever it may be? Any thoughts on that? And some of you have shared along the way some of the things that you're thinking about, but
well, I think it makes me want to help the children be more observant, and so by being outside even more, because that's the only way they're going, like he alluded, like he said in the article, unless they're outside and can really feel the earth and get to know the environment, they're not, why would you have any care for it, so.
And kind of along that, I was just thinking about, some of my work, even on the computer, I could do outside, and I have a shady place
Mhm.
I can sit. And if I'm outside, my children are more likely to be outside as well,
Yeah. Yep.
and that makes a difference in spending the time out there. And professionally, I'm doing stuff with this all the time. And so I have a book deadline of mid-August or so. So that's when my next steps are to continue pulling all of our ideas and such around living loose parts together. So that's another resource that's out there. And yeah, for me, that's what I'm doing. But I
And
just,
helping the children.
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I
Go ahead.
thought you were done. Sorry. I mean, just helping the children be less fearful of things as well. Like we have carpenter bees at our, in our playground area. So we're always trying to help the children see they're not going to hurt you. If
Mhm.
you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone and stuff. But they're only going to be able to do that if they are out there and experiencing them and they see
Yeah.
I've been out here and they haven't hurt me.
Yeah. And teaching them to be calm and take those deep
Mhm.
breaths as
Yeah.
they come near and such. Usually they're just curious. Hoverflies, I don't know if you've seen those before, but those have kind of cured me of some of that. They look like little bees, but they're not really.
They're
They're the
not.
flies that like to come and lick your sweat, which just seems kind of weird. But so they just
Yeah.
land on you, they lick you, they leave. So they don't
Yeah.
hurt you or anything. In soccer games with lots of hoverflies, have gotten me a little bit more used to being calm when there are things around me that
Yeah. Yeah.
may be fearful. And really cultivating that
Mhm.
curiosity about the insects and things as opposed to the dislike, I guess. And we're
Mhm.
all are going to feel different ways about animals, and it is something to consider. And we how do we portray that to the children around us, because the children pick up and learn from our attitudes and behaviors. And if we're up
Yeah.
on a table, when a snake is there, what does that say to the children?
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean we have to touch it, doesn't mean we have to be anywhere near it. But are we allowing them to fuel their natural sense of wonder and curiosity and awe, without the interference of our fear? So having some strategies to kind of deal with that, letting our partner take the lead in exploring those with children. I sometimes get startled with things that I don't know were there. I'm
Mhm.
surprised by it. I'm not necessarily scared of it once I see
Mhm.
what it
Yeah.
is, but I do get startled. And I think that that's a difference. And then once we get past the startledness, we go, okay, what do we have here? That curiosity kind of kicks in and such. So, yeah.
Are you familiar with the? I mean, sure you are. Give bees a chance and give rocks a chance, and like there's a whole series of them.
I am not sure if I am. That sounds like something I need to look up. So, it's a series of
Yeah.
books that try to
Yeah. I know
that.
there's. I know I have rocks, one on rocks, and I have one on bees.
Okay.
But I'm sure I think there are more than
Okay.
those two. But the book "Give Bees a Chance" it teaches about all different types of bees, and it kind of teaches some of it. You know, teaches some of those strategies: remaining calm,
Okay.
blowing
Yeah.
air,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. So that might be something to add to the book list. But
Yeah.
um,
Resources.
yeah, yeah,
And if they don't have it, other ones that would be great would be snakes and spiders. Those are snakes, spiders, and stinging insects. Those are kind of, and ticks to some degree, which I
yeah.
mean, we should be aware of ticks and such,
Where
right?
ticks, yeah,
And take precautious, preventative measures, so that, because ticks are carrying diseases that are not helpful for people. But those are kind of the fears I typically see, though there are others that can be there and such. There is another series. I don't know if you've seen Next Time You See, and it's got like a spider, a shell, and some of those. Those are really good in diving into that sense of wonder and awe about that particular thing. And so I would say for that one, I kind of prefer, it seems more like a read along book with like one or two children and an adult, but then going through an experience with that thing, with that, whatever that object or insect or whatever it may be. But it's from National Science Teachers Association, and they're the publishers of
Okay.
it. But it's kind of like that guided teacher talk that you may have along with
Mhm.
it in book form, so that, and beautiful pictures. And I've learned, I learned from these books too. So
I was gonna say this might be something I definitely want to get for myself, if nothing, if nothing else. So
yeah, definitely. So we may want to collaborate on some book lists and such with us
yeah,
as well. And with our book that we're working on, The Living Loose Parts, all of these books are part of some of the different things that we're talking about too. So yeah.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. Well, thank you all for your time tonight, and look forward to seeing you again. Our next kind of event that we have coming up is August 10th. Same time, looking at vitamin N. When we chose this book, we looked for things that were pretty easily available at the library and things like that. So, and it's really a bunch of different ways to enrich the health and happiness of your family and community and combat nature deficit disorder, he says. So it's just a bunch of different ideas. You don't have to read the whole thing, but if you get some, feel free to. And then we also have a fall version of this with that chat. So talking about some of the fall things. So thanks so much, and save those dates for 2024 for Nature Play Days of Indiana Children and Nature Network.